Hello, everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. I'm joined here by my co-host Gaurav, and this is Echoes of War. How are you, Gaurav?
Hey Craig, wonderful to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this series. It's partly, I would say, just as a teaser to the audience, a sort of a redo slash improvement on a previously released episode.
Yeah, so just to get into it with the audience. Well, actually, first, let's before we even start explaining what we're going to be doing, I just want to, give a shout out to if you want to further support the channel, you can please check out the YouTube membership over the Pacific War Channel on YouTube, or you can join the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to my exclusive podcast series, which is like 27 plus episodes and ongoing. You get early access to all of the material I make, and you get voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. But like Gaurav was alluding to, we had made an episode talking about the overrated and underrated generals of World War II. And we kind of made our list too big, and then we had to rush it. And we didn't really say everything we wanted to say, and we didn't touch upon a lot of figures that we wanted to talk about. And well, the episode did really well. I was kind of surprised. A lot of people liked it. So we were getting to thinking we would not redo it, but we want to talk about who we think are the best and worst generals, but we also divided it because one thing I thought was kind of weird was comparing generals and admirals. It didn't make sense
Or
to me.
and just as you said, we're not redoing it, we're improving and expanding the scope because, as you said, we are comparing admirals, to generals, splitting the theaters.
Yeah.
And I feel with this list now we actually will have time to give everyone their due consideration of
Yeah.
time when we speak about them. And I think this time we've really added a proper naval and aviation element that will come later in the series as well.
Yeah, so just to explain to the audience, this episode is going to be covering the land generals, as we'll call them, for the Pacific theater. We're also going to do the land generals for Europe. We're also going to do admirals across the board for World War II. And we'll call them air commanders, the generals of the various air forces from all of the different factions of World War II. So it's going to be 4 episodes, and we really hope you like it. We're going to try and shuffle things around. I don't want to use the exact same people we did like in the last episode. So we kind of pick and choose and we looked into different things. And there's going to be more honorable mentions this time. And again, to the audience, we are not saying any of these generals are quote unquote shit or that they are the best. It's kind of just our opinions. We're having a little bit of fun with this, so don't take it too seriously. Clearly, we couldn't find the worst general because he probably is a no name, you know? But stating all of that, Gaurav, why don't you hit the roulette table and where are we starting? What faction?
Yep. So just with our random dice, we are starting with China.
China, which is definitely going to be my background. So I had two guys in mind when it came to the best general for the Chinese forces. It's going to be the same choice I had made last time, so it's definitely Xu Yue. Honorable mention, I'll say a little bit later, is definitely Sun Yizhen. But why I chose Xu Yue? Um, when you look at the Chinese generals, there's a lot of biases. So whenever you hear about who was thought to be really good or not, it actually would often come down to their ability to speak English because a lot of the writing that we get in the Western world, of course, is from American commanders who got to work with them, like one Joseph Stilwell. But Xu Yue is a very interesting figure. He survived countless amounts of military and political conflicts, particularly with Chiang Kai-shek. So, not to go into his entire career, but he joined the Tongmenghui, which is the precursor to the Kuomintang, and he ended up rising through the ranks in the military service, and he ended up kind of being the bodyguard for Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the Republic. He actually saved Sun Yat-sen and his wife and family from nearly being killed because Dr. Sun Yat-sen had a falling out with Chen Zhongming, and they actually fought multiple times. And yeah, Dr. Sun Yat-sen owes his life to this guy. And after that, he would end up fighting under Chiang Kai-shek, especially during the Northern Expedition. But he's one of the few generals that would countermand Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek, as a lot of people probably are aware, he kind of had a zero tolerance for communists, we'll say that much. And he tried to purge them on multiple occasions. And because of some rather heinous actions, some massacres that had occurred, well, Xu Yue kind of asked that he be arrested for his crimes, and obviously Chiang Kai-shek didn't like that. So he fell out of favor with Chiang. He fought with some warlords, actually technically against Chiang Kai-shek for a while, lost. He was actually fighting under the Guangxi clique. He ends up going back uh, to fight with Chiang Kai-shek just
It
before.
just sounds like those mercenary captains we keep hearing about in European Italian history.
But what's interesting is not that he was like the best divisional commander under Chiang, he kind of was. Chiang knew he was a very proficient commander. So when he came back, like Chiang took him. And I mean, there was a lot of guys that were in similar circumstances where Chiang would do this, but Chiang was like, I need this guy. And for those interested, it was the Xing'an incident that oh my God. So there was, I don't want to go through the whole history, but there was an incident where Chiang Kai-shek was kidnapped and he was going to be like tossed over to the communists because he was unwilling to go to war with the Japanese at the offset of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And actually, at this time, it was Shi Yue who offered to personally go grab him and give him the communists. So he did that. So that didn't sit too well with Chiang Kai-shek. But again, he survives all this because he's such a great general. When the Second Sino-Japanese War finally breaks out, there's hundreds and hundreds of battles that end terribly for the Chinese. But Shi Yue was one of the few guys who actually dished out severe defeats to the Japanese. So just for one example, 1938, there was a battle for Wuhan, and Shi Yue, he played a critical role in defeating the Japanese 106th Division. He actually nearly annihilated them, which is unheard of in
Damn.
this conflict. Like, this is a very rare occurrence. And it was mostly due to his tactical command, I'd say that much. He also had to deal with like all sorts of combined arms warfare that he didn't have. So he didn't have the same resources the Japanese did. And the Japanese were so hard pressed by his actions, they actually had to airdrop like officers with parachutes into the battlefield to try and take over what was going on because their officers were completely screwing it up. And then,
I just gonna add about that Battle of Wuhan where he nearly destroyed that division.
mm,
It's not also a battle where he had a numerically overwhelming odds in his
mm,
favor because it seems that he had 100,000 men for that battle
yeah,
and the Japanese had 92,000. So
yeah,
really it's just a small disparity, like half a division's worth.
I'm right.
And he still inflicts over 30,000 casualties on the Japanese, taking only 15,000 losses himself.
But the thing that people, if anybody's ever heard of this guy, the thing that he's most renowned for were the multiple battles for Changsha. So during the first, second, and third, he decisively defeated the Japanese. And basically, his whole strategy is, I forget what he called it in English, it would translate to the hot pot strategy. Basically, it was a way of luring your enemy into a terrain that favored you. So it was literally this mountainous terrain outside of Changsha, where he would just lure the Japanese divisions in and then swarm upon them with artillery and kill them off. And this worked three times, and it's against the same Japanese general who keeps falling for it. The fourth time, the Japanese come in, and it's during like I think it was Ichigo, and they
It was the
overwhelm
battle
them.
during the Ichigo.
They
I think
completely overwhelmed them. But yeah,
I gotta just add this here. Uh, this is also where we see military politics at play with the
mm,
United States.
yeah,
He, Zhu Yue was a great friend of General Chenault
yeah. Chenault to him
and of
were blood brothers. That's what
Blood
Chenault
Brothers.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and when I think when the fourth defense of Changsha and Stillwell did not, he said, if I'm able to drop me 500 tons of supplies and ammo every day, I'll be able to hold out. And Chenault actually, unlike Goring with Stalingrad, actually had the resources to do so, but Stillwell was just so dead against it.
yeah, yeah. He did this against Joseph Stilwell's orders. Joseph Stilwell, rightfully, mind you, realized that there was rampant corruption within the NRA, and he just
Hmm.
would not allow supplies and ammunition to get over to Shiyue because he just thought he was another corrupt official. So Chenault just went over his head and would air supply him, and it's what kept him in the battles. Yeah.
True, but I guess this is like where, Stillwell's judgment, it comes into that gray area because, as you said, he was quite competent. He
Mm.
was dealing out the Japanese. I think this was the only front, mostly for Ichigo, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
where the Japanese actually did take a beating themselves.
Yeah, because Ichigo was just a steamroll process. The Japanese almost everywhere. There was not even it was not even a fight. Like the amount that they threw at the Chinese, it was insane. But yeah,
If it was the largest operation in terms of manpower,
it's
and
incredible. Yeah.
it was only at this particular front that the Japanese had to really, I'll say, alter their plans.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everything pretty much was going their way. So, yeah, I think it really puts Stillwell's decision in a gray area, I'll just call it.
We'll be talking about Stillwell later, by the way. But
True enough, but
in general, Shiyue was a proponent, I mean, forced to be, by the way, of guerrilla warfare because that was just the nature of how the Chinese had to resist the Japanese. They really didn't have any of the resources the Japanese had. And given the fact that, yeah, he did have manpower, all the Chinese generals had a lot of people, but a lot of them were completely untrained. They were under-equipped. Shiyue was he was very proficient and he was very professional as a soldier, and he made sure that he would train his men. And it goes without saying, like the forces that fought under him, their morale was a lot better than most Chinese forces. They actually defeated the Japanese multiple times. Like he
now I
definitely
can
earns
definitely,
it.
I'll just say one thing. Now I definitely see why Chenault called him Pattern of Asia.
Yeah. And he lived to be 101 years old, by the way. I just found that out recently.
Damn.
Yeah, he survives. Even in Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek, like I'm surprised Chiang didn't kill him because Shi Yue really publicly shamed him multiple times. It's brutal. But yeah, but there are those that I'll just say as an honorable mention. There are those that would say Sun Yizhen. So he was someone that fought in Burma mostly. He was considered Rommel of the East, actually. That was the nickname that was given to him. Joseph Stilwell is the guy that praised him. So the only reason why you ever hear his name is because Joseph Stilwell liked him. And Su Jin did speak English. He did have a background. He went to the United States. He was educated a bit. It's not that he was a bad general or anything. It's just compared to Shiyue, he had more help. He was in a different theater that, yes, it was very difficult, but I would argue he's outshined by Shiyue, but honorable mention nonetheless. He also, both of these men served at the Battle of Shanghai and did very well together. So they did brush shoulders too.
I think it's just so funny that the two guys each is backed up by one of the two major US commanders in the theater.
Yeah. But again, I'm a Westerner and I am now reading Chinese sources. I go through and I translate them. It's inevitable that I'm going to be biased towards, who the Westerners thought was the greatest general. Now people like if you're reading Chinese sources, they want to only argue the communist commanders, which absolutely do not deserve to be called the best generals, like Peng Tuhui or whatever. Like no.
Uh,
And you'll find him on the list. He doesn't deserve it.
that's fair. I think maybe we should now head over to the one we rated as the
The
worst
worst.
general for the Chinese
Yeah.
forces.
There's actually I could have picked someone else. I am picking the same one that I had done in that previous episode because I simply don't like this guy. It's General Tang Shengji. I don't want to go into the entire history. He's a very long history. Brush shoulders with Xu Wei, by the way. Also, he really screwed over Chiang Kai-shek multiple times. But again, he was seen as a very proficient commander, so Chiang reluctantly kept taking him back into service. But Tong Xue, during the warlord era, he ended up fighting for multiple warlords against Chiang Kai-shek, and then eventually he joined Chiang Kai-shek's northern expedition. He was so proficient, he was given one of the main armies. But at one point, um, I'm not going to get into the history of this. Wang Jingwei, Chiang Kai-shek had a falling out. There was two governments that emerged, one in Wuhan, one in Nanjing. And Tang Xue, basically, he was flirting with both to see who he would serve. And instead, he just became a warlord again and decided to try and fight them both because he's an idiot. He allied himself with the Guangxi and Guangdong clique members, which were formidable, but they weren't going to win anything. And he basically was exploiting the situation. So the Northern Expedition, for those who don't know, was Chiang Kai-shek trying to reunify China against the biggest warlords. And right when they're about to win, Tong Ching-ji does this bullshit. And basically, he's threatening the whole Northern Expedition by attacking what should be his allies. The enemy, which is like Zhang Zolin, Zhang Zongchang, all these other guys, they got to exploit the situation. It caused mayhem. Tong Cheng-ji is defeated. He isn't killed or anything, and he gets shoved to the side. Lo and behold, though, when the Japanese attack in 37, Tang Cheng-ji shows back up. Chiang Kai-shek says, "You know what? This is a crisis. I need a commander. I know what you're capable of." So he lets him be the garrison commander at Nanjing. There's
Oh
a
God.
there's a lot of misinformation about this. It seems likely that he was intentionally put there by Chiang Kai-shek to be a fall guy, but other sources say that Tong Cheng-ju wanted the appointment. Regardless, the way it's remembered, because a lot of this might actually not be his fault, but I'm going to still blame him for it. So he immediately announced to the public he was going to fight to the last man at Nanjing, that he would die himself, he would not give up the city, and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, apparently Chiang Kai-shek told him, yeah, you're gonna have to give up the city, just like leave. We're gonna abandon it, make the capital in Chongqing, whatever. Anyways, the Battle of Shanghai goes the way it went. All of the people that are fleeing from Shanghai are going in the direction of Nanjing, dragging the Japanese towards it. So, Tong Cheng-ji, he basically comes over to Nanjing. He gathers 100,000 soldiers in the area. They're pretty untrained. A lot of them are the defeated troops from Shanghai, and he's trying to basically create defensive works. He places the 35th, 72nd divisions at the back gates of Nanjing to stop civilians and military people from fleeing Nanjing's area. And by doing so, he basically breaks up the roads, he destroys the boats, and he burns all the nearby villages to literally make sure that all the people are stuck there because he wants to make a stand, apparently. As soon as the Japanese reach the outskirts of Nanjing, he immediately realizes that they're completely screwed. All of their defenses are overwhelmed in a matter of days. He begins this thing where he's secretly trying to negotiate with the Japanese to give up the city, but he's doing this in secrecy. He's not announcing this. Publicly, he's announcing he's going to die to the last man. Now, depending on the source, apparently Chiang Kai-shek's the one who's telling him he's going to be the fall guy and to say all this. It might have just been Tang himself. We don't know. It's a lot of he said, she said. Regardless, he flees before everyone else through a northern gate that no one else is allowed to use with a few of his men, and he doesn't announce the city surrendered. The Japanese do what everyone knows happens at Nanjing. It's the Nanjing massacre, and he was pretty much blamed for this. And I'd say, given his history and what a piece of shit he was, I would say that it's right to kind of blame him for the Nanjing massacre. So I think that's why he's the worst Chinese general of World War II.
Fair enough.
It's
So I guess if it ends our Chinese section, I think let's
Yeah, I couldn't really think of an
roll it
honorable
up.
mention for worst. It really came down to him.
Again, it's quite subjective, right? Isn't it? Because Sun
Yeah.
Li Jen also has a fairly strong case to be the best. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we put the roll, and well, lo and behold, we have the British.
Okay, so the British. Now, for the British in the Pacific Theater, again, people are not going to be surprised. I mean, I tried to think there are multiple choices. It didn't have to be him, but it was hard not to choose William Slim. I mean, for those who
Uh,
know,
yeah, I think one reason why we have William Slim is Harold Alexander gets pulled out of the theater and takes command in Europe.
yes,
So I think Montgomery also for a bit was there, and Auchinleck, while he did initially a decent job with, especially with the capture of Iran, and then returned after his disgraceful dismissal from the Eighth Army in North Africa,
Hmm.
he kind of plays more of a very back fiddle role. Though he does, I should just mention, like maybe Auchinleck as just a great mention is the way he helped reform the British Indian Army. It really set the foundation for Slim's offensives to be much more potent
Yeah,
because now you are actually improving the quality of all your men.
yeah,
So
definitely.
that definitely deserves a good amount of credit.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes without saying, William Slim has an extensive career spanning multiple theaters, multiple time periods, going back to World War One. The guy fought at Gallipoli. It's simply incredible. He saw desert warfare, jungle warfare, mainland European warfare. He had a lot under his belt, even prior to World War Two. And his knowledge, the experience gained just in the Indian Army alone was It's pretty insane considering, his colleagues. People, they know him from the East African Middle East campaigns, 1941, before he's tossed over to Burma, where he's really kind of just tossed into the shitstorm, really, if you think about it. So, for those who don't know, the initial Burma campaign is just Japan running amok and causing endless amounts of routes and retreats. And unfortunately, Slim was part of that, but I'd say he did what he could to try and make sure it wasn't a complete
It's
rout.
it's it was only two men who I think pretty much led the British Indian forces from Burma retreated with some semblance of order, and that's Slim and Harold Alexander.
Yeah,
I'm not even going to sugarcoat that. And
definitely.
one thing I really admire of Slim, he trained his men properly. He was a good trainer of men.
Yeah.
He took the trainings and the reforms quite well. And one of his key aspects that he tried to instill into his forces was off-road mobility is going to win this
Hmm.
in this theater.
Yeah.
The tank is not going to be the dominant factor. Artillery is not going to be it as much. It is going to be the infantry. So you need to be able to move. It's pretty much why he probably would have sanctioned the Chintits as well.
Yeah.
But
And
he did train a lot of his men, with the basic premise that, you exchange heavy equipment for Mueller air transported equipment and motor transport is at the minimum, which makes sense. You're going through horrible jungles, there are no roads. You have to be able to march with what you can carry.
yeah.
And he also was adamant in not only training the frontline men, but the support staff. So all the Indian cooks, the medics, any administrative staff that you would have in any normal army operations, all of these men had to at least undergo basic training. The idea was once you get cut off, you form a defensive box till reinforcements come and bail you out.
Mm.
And some soldiers I remember were quite upset with this. Non-combatant roles, suddenly you have to learn how to fire with an organized team, etc. But he said, well, who's going to save you? You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
the infantry, you have to be able to hold off. The Japanese can easily outflank you, and we will not even know it.
Yep. And I mean, for those who don't know, he adopted the 14th Army,
Hmm.
completely like to say demoralized is an understatement. The one of the most demoralized army ever. After undergoing the general retreat from Burma, they were just shattered. They were extremely under-equipped. They also were at this point where they believed the Japanese were just superhumans who had a super ability to fight in jungles because of how badly they were beaten. And like Gaurav had said, if William Slim, he trained these men, completely reversed everything about them. He's training also a multinational force. He's got British, Indians, Africans, Burmese soldiers. He's building their morale. What he did just to regain their morale is it's incredible.
It's, I think one thing I do find very interesting about Slim amongst almost every major British commander of the war, even if you expand into Europe, he, prior to the official declaration of World War II, he did not even have a general's rank.
Hmm.
He was actually a colonel.
Yeah, yeah, I know he was acting the whole time. Yeah,
I think only towards in 1945 he was promoted to his rank of field marshal.
yeah, yeah. He was very
It's
overlooked.
just, yeah, especially since most of the promotions he received were temporary slash acting, so
Yeah,
they were not formal promotions.
yeah,
I think his great moments definitely came at first the Battle of Imphal, where we do see one of our protagonists in the Japanese section
yeah.
playing a central role. And he did a magnificent defense as well. Granted, he was also, I will just say, he was aided by the overzealous Japanese commander.
But if you look at the numbers that were tossed at him, like, because yes, we're gonna make fun of it later, Operation Yugo, but the sheer amount, the numbers and resources that were tossed at Slim, it was insane. And Slim looked at it and he was like, "And Pal and Kohima, it's gonna be these places that are gonna, if they get broken, like this is gonna completely
This is a
destroy our supply lines, and we will be threatened in India." Like it was insane. But
True, but he
yeah.
conducted a masterful defense and
Yep.
with his subordinates, right? So you had Jeffrey Schoons and General Montagu. Like I think I would call them, they were like his key
Yeah.
subordinate commanders. They all together planned a really active defense proactively. They maintain their supply lines. They focus on the right areas.
Yep.
And I think that is a great trait with a commander. And as you'll see, the Battle of Imphal, even the Japanese suffer almost 55,000 casualties in that battle in Slim's defense of the ski towns. And the British, like the British Indian forces, take a total of 12,000 casualties in the same battle.
Yeah.
In that one battle, he's practically annihilated the best Japanese army in the region.
Yeah.
And that in its own self is
It
a
was like
big thing.
150,000 Japanese tried to invade India, and like almost all of them died. It's insane.
True.
Yugo was a
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah. But another thing
Then,
about Slim that people might not know is he actually really, really cared for the men. He would airlift them to hospitals. He really made sure he took care of his guys, and they knew they were being taken care of. So again, that really increased morale. They actually felt that they were fighting for quote unquote like a soldier's soldier, is what we would say, you know.
they were a forgotten army for a reason.
Yep.
And he actually went to battlefields after they were cleared to try to inspect and see the
Mhm.
positions, which is why he actually gave the directive that, if possible, try to outflank the Japanese rather than go head on, because
Yep.
he realized the way that they constructed their defenses, where they could exploit a massive amount of success. Similar to, like, why the Marines also favored outflanking the Japanese
Yeah.
in the Pacific. And one thing, and this is something I've always loved in military generals, is he delegated command where needed. A
Yeah, it's
lot
very
of his
important.
commanders, right from your core commanders all the way down to battalion commanders or even captains, they knew they could take the initiative. A lot of these guys knew that as long as they stick to the plan, they had the freedom of choice in how to maneuver and get around. And this is such a key thing in battlefields. I just don't know why, for example, it took so long in Europe until like the 1870s for people to even discover this.
Um, hmm. Yeah, no, they're two
So,
very different theaters. I think the Pacific War was kind of just
no,
so
I'm just
much
talking about
happening fast. Oh, and more,
warfare
yeah, in
in
general, yeah.
general. It wasn't until Moltke's Prussian army, for example, that this
Yeah,
concept really came to the light.
that's true. Uh,
And yeah, and I think he did have a pretty good grasp about logistics, especially in this
in the jungle too.
really, yeah. And
But
he actually was quite a big proponent of better medical care for his men.
yeah, it was very it was a distinguishing part about him, and his men loved him for it. Like you'll read from memoirs, they thought of him as a soldier. It meant a lot to them. They saw him as a frontline commander. So he and I mean,
Yeah.
read any book. This guy is everyone professes that this guy was one of the greatest in the Pacific Theater. I won't get into the
And,
accusations
uh,
against him recently, but
let's
yeah.
let's that's not really part of it, but let's just say one thing. He got along with Joseph Stilwell as a Britisher.
Yeah, no one
That
hated him. Yeah.
alone, that says a great thing about his personality, is that Joseph Stilwell considered him on good terms.
Yep, it's true. He was one of the, I think, only British that, yeah, maybe he was the only British guy that Stillwell didn't hate.
So that's saying something.
Yeah.
Yep, I think since we finished Bill Slim, I think let's move on to the other part. It's kind of hard to really put too many generals in the British for the Pacific, just because they don't really have, beyond Burma and India, really
Yeah.
that's pretty much where their operations get limited to. The rest is just the United States. And
It's not a surprise to anyone who the worst pick will be for the British generals, because everyone knows, it's this guy, of course, and he rightfully does get blamed. I'm gonna try and be more nuanced about it, by the way. Of course, it's Arthur Percival, the man who lost Singapore. everyone remembers the loss of Singapore, but I'm gonna go a little bit into before that why he really screwed up during the Malayan campaign because I think that's very overlooked. Uh,
Yeah.
to look into, his background a bit, he did serve in the army during World War One. He gained experience in various theaters, colonial service. He served in Ireland during the Irish War of Independence, and then he held, of course, posts in Malaya and other British colonies. But he was appointed to command the forces in Malaya just kind of prior to the outbreak of the war. And he specifically had to oversee the defenses of Singapore. And everyone knows where this is going because anyone knows this guy's name, they know all the things that he had screwed up. But before we get into actually, no, I guess I have to talk about the Singapore defenses before I get into Malaya. But he dramatically underestimated the Japanese. He believed that Singapore was impregnable, and he believed that any attack upon it, like most people believed, would be seaward. They would not be coming through the land. And he didn't adequately prepare forces in Malaya to be able to meet an enemy threat if it was to come from the north. He inadequately prepared for a siege of Singapore. He, God, I mean, like across the board, he
I
was,
I'll just add one thing about the seaward side assault.
yeah, sure.
I know last time we did dispel the myth that the artillery guns could not turn backwards.
Yeah, it's a myth. Yeah.
That's a myth, but the ranging of the guns had
Hmm.
already been done for the seaward side,
Yeah.
which is where it's more potent, so you know what is the angles or whatever you need to put.
Yep.
They don't have it for the landward side, which is where the guns would have been completely ineffective because you'd have to spend hours of battery fire to range your shots.
Yeah.
And if I'm
He,
not mistaken, he was still supportive of the initial plan in the defense of Malaya, which was let's just when they consider the possibility that there could be a land invasion, that let's just go and hold the line in Thailand as well.
okay, here, I'll get to that in a bit. That's a specific point
Yeah,
I'll make. That's a very
fair enough.
specific point because he's not 100% to blame for that, but I can blame him for a specific issue with that. But
All right.
he was obsessed with the defense of Singapore, and it consumed his mind when it came to the responsibilities of his command. So a lot of the other commanders had told him it would be the best advice to not limit your perimeter and that you should defend the northeastern shore of, of Singapore. Whereas Percival, like when the Battle of Singapore breaks out, he basically just thins out his lines and tries to like defend everything. It made no sense. But aside from that, like you were alluding to, when it came to the Battle of Malaya, there was an operation that had been already thought about prior to Percival even being in Malaya. It was Operation Matador. So, like you're alluding to, if the Japanese were to attack from the mainland, they would come through Thailand. So, Operation Matador was a preemptive strike to go into Thailand to stop them from landing, but it would have gone against, certain
Laws
international
of
laws.
neutrality.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But it was absolutely the right decision to do. They should have done it. It wasn't Percival necessarily who said no to Operation Matador. His superiors didn't allow him. So I can't blame Percival for that. But the sub operation that came after Matador was canceled. So the plan B was called Operation Krokal. And Krokal was just Matador, but smaller. So the idea was okay, we're not going to preemptively go over the Thai border. But if we receive word that the Japanese land in Thailand, then we're going to go over the border. Obviously, this is kind of lessening your lightning strike capability. And this is where
Hmm.
Percival really fucked up. So Percival prolonged it because he was just so unsure of himself and his forces. His frontline commanders were begging and begging to initiate Operation Krokal. And they had the forces necessary to dislodge the Japanese beachhead in Thailand. They actually could have done a significant amount of damage, but it was Percival himself who had thwarted this by just kind of dragging his feet. And as we see with the Malayan campaign, Percival was like obsessed with static defense. He just wouldn't unleash any offensives And he just allowed the Japanese to continuously roll over him, where he would get his men to go to another defensive position just to get rolled over again and again and again. He would never put his foot down. He would never actually engage the enemy. And he just kind of allowed
It's
them to go through.
I think just this is just like my knowledge from what I've read, Kings of Generals,
Yeah.
Pacific War series. First of all, I just add with Krokol, they had a great chance because when you have a decisive commander who would have acted,
Hmm.
especially as you said, while they would have violated Thai's neutrality, let's not be the Thailand's dictator, like Faboon. He
Yeah.
was playing both sides anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one way or the other, he's gonna join one of them. And you kill an amphibious force in its landing stage, that's the end of the invasion,
Yeah.
which they lost that opportunity. And I remember so many times as the Japanese are advancing down the Malaysian coast, they literally are taking difficult paths. Sometimes you have like a couple of battalions landing by boat off
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Amphibious
then
assaults. Yeah.
ambushing amphibious assaults right behind the British lines. And then Percival immediately is like not even letting his forces like say engage,
Yeah.
just like immediately withdraw. And a planned withdrawal all of a sudden just is going to cause so much chaos.
And specifically, this is called a static defense. So, in military terms, what he wanted to do was establish lines that men would just man the lines. Whereas other commanders, they find out the enemy, let's say, is landing behind them, the enemy is landing to the side of them, the enemy is going through the jungle or taking some kind of weird anomaly terrain they didn't think of. Usually, an aggressive commander will say, okay, we're going to launch a counteroffensive to give ourselves more time, maybe to keep the line manned or to see if we can defeat the enemy. He never does this. He continuously just goes to the next static defense. And the Japanese see this and they're like, okay, it's like, okay, we're just going through the hurdles one by one by one. And we know as soon as we get to the vicinity, he'll probably just leave, leaving all of the freaking resources and, all sorts of materials behind.
Yeah, this is actually going to come to that since you're just giving all of a sudden a quick withdrawal order. It's not like you're having a planned withdrawal because these guys initially, these generals have like, yep, I have to hold the line.
Yeah.
You'll prepare all your defenses, and you're like, oh yeah, now we need to withdraw. Well, tough luck getting everything across again.
Yeah. And then after the Malayan campaign, after he's had all of these men run into the Singapore, the obvious thing happens. Not to go into it too much because we're going to be talking about this character, but Yamashita, he deceives the British by making it seem like he's going to attack specifically the northeastern corner. A lot of the commanders are telling Percival at the time they do not believe this is going to be the case. And Percival, he just kind of like focuses on that. He thinly spreads his men in other areas. Yamashita clearly sees this. He attacks the thinly spaced areas.
So defending everything, gaining nothing in the
Yeah.
end.
And like for example, where the 22nd Australian Brigade is, it's like this weak pocket. They get just slammed. Percival he refuses to reinforce them because he just continues to believe, you know what, the main assault's not going to be there. It's going to be in the northeast where the artillery from the Japanese seems to be hitting because Yamashita brilliantly was just pounding this area to make it seem like that was going to be the case. And then eventually, it's actually it's the break in the water supply to Singapore that kind of makes Percival surrender without really putting up much of a fight. And even at that, his engineers told him that they could have fixed the water problem if he would just like allocate enough men to them, like engineers, and he didn't for whatever reason. It's just an abysmal performance. And Churchill said it best. It was one of the most shameful defeats in British history, right? And he deserves to get shit on. Like there's no way about it. Like he really lost
I
Singapore badly.
I completely agree with that for the simple reason you never have a situation where such a large army is annihilated by even an army that was like what 1/3 of its size.
One third, they didn't have enough ammunition to pull it off. Like Yamashita, he went too far too fast, and his logistics didn't catch up to him. So he literally shows up to the gates of Singapore, and he's like, "Oh shit, I'm now kind of screwed because if they figure out what's going on, they launch a counterattack. They could actually devastate my army."
It's
And
it's actually like a facade that he has, the
yeah,
perfect mirage for a lack of a better
yeah.
term.
And Yamashita just poker faced it. He bluffed. That's what it.
And
Yeah,
The bluff worked wonderfully.
I love I can't remember who wrote the book, but it's there's a scene where Percival is walking or he's being driven over to Yamashita's headquarters. And apparently Yamashita has like no ammunition left. So he has a bunch of men with guns with like no clips in them, just like kind of manning the tent. And Percival like notices it looks odd and he doesn't figure it out until they finally agree on the surrender terms. And then Percival realizes and it must have been very embarrassing. But yeah. But yeah, that
Yeah,
covers
it's
Britain.
yeah, I know. For all you want to say that, he was there when Yamashita surrendered his forces and MacArthur made Percival come there. Because, I mean, let's not face it, he and his men endured a horrible time as POWs, to
Yeah.
say the least.
Oh yeah.
It's shouldn't be masked over that. Probably, I would go as far as saying the worst British commander of the war.
I mean, I'm trying to think of Europe. Could there have been someone? I don't
I don't think,
Noel.
I don't think,
Noel, I mean, he's a lower end commander, but he was pretty bad. Like the Arakan campaign.
yeah, but I'm trying to just kind of also keep it to equal to levels of command,
Yeah, no, this is a
such.
this is a very large command, and I don't think anybody lost as much. No, yeah, Percival,
Yeah,
pretty bad. Yeah.
indeed. So I guess since that ends Britain, I think now it's definitely leaving us with the two most well-known, prominent, and biggest players of the war Pacific theater of operations now. So we have the US and Japanese. I don't
Mhm.
know, Craig, just so that we'll just do it a bit different here. Why don't you just I'll do a coin flip on
Yeah,
like,
go for
an
it.
app, and you can just tell me which one is gonna be the Japs.
So for the Japanese, I'm actually because I know everyone's gonna be like, okay, people have listened to me. No, I am biased towards Yamashita, but it's going to be a duel. I'm gonna share Yamashita and Kurabayashi. Sorry, Kurabayashi
Well,
together.
good thing the coin flip also came for heads since we do have that.
So it'll be the Japanese then.
Yep.
So for those who haven't heard me, gloat over Yamashita, Yamashita is a very rare commander, and actually the other guy we'll be talking about is extremely similar to Yamashita. Yamashita was called the German expert. So during World War One, he went over to Germany and he got to see the 1918 version of the German army, who were proficient in combined arms warfare because the very last year of World War One for the Germans pretty much looked like the first year for World War Two for them. Despite the technological differences, the Germans learned what you would call blitzkrieg tactics or combined warfare at the very end of World War One. So he got to see
True
this
enough,
firsthand.
I'll just say that was the first time, on the Western Front, the stormtrooper tactics were used en
Yeah,
masse.
exactly. Yamashita got to see this, and it had a profound impact on him. He was one of the main guys kind of advocating for combined arms warfare for the Japanese forces going forward. He also happened to be a member of the Kodaha faction. So, for those who don't know, there was two factions that rose up in the Japanese army. So there was a few members in the navy, but not that much. And that was the Tosaha
And
faction.
that is also known as the Imperial Way.
Yes, the Imperial Way and the Tosa faction, or Control faction, is what they were also called. Hideki Tojo was the main man for the Tosai faction. Yamashita wasn't the leader of the Kodaha faction, but he was one of the leading figures, and he was implicated in the coup that happened. And let's just say it kind of completely destroyed his career. He was beloved by everybody, and this really it put a stain on him. Hideki Tojo never saw past that because to him, this guy was like enemy number one. He was part of the other faction, and he hated him, and he'll hate him for other reasons after. But being the German expert, he was sent back over, actually to Vienna first, then Berlin. He even went to Rome. I don't know why he wanted to learn from the Italians, but whatever. But he
In
learned.
theory, I'll just say this: the Italians had theoretically talked about combined arms and blitzkrieg well before the Germans.
True. That is true. As we saw in North Africa, there was potential to use said doctrine, but he didn't. But Yamashita, he goes over to,
By the general who wrote it himself.
yeah. So he goes
Yeah.
over and he gets to see the Blitz. So he gets to actually see Blitzkrieg warfare for World War II. And of course, he's enthralled by it. And he wants to incorporate a lot of it, He wants to streamline like the air arm to mechanize the army, integrate, control the armed forces, coordinate, have proper joint chiefs of staff, paratrooper corps, use propaganda more effectively.
So
He's
basically becoming like in structure, the Wehrmacht and Nazi war machine in the
yeah.
East.
I would like to call it, he's actually thinking in World War II terms, whereas a lot of commanders are not. They're thinking like outdated stuff, like bonsai charts kind of stuff. Like it's very outdated for the time
True
period.
enough. And though I still always question why everyone seems to have that enthrallment with the paratroops, since
Yeah,
they,
get massacred.
yeah, but that's a, yeah.
Yeah, being a paratrooper sucked in World War II. Oh my God, it was bad.
But yeah,
But it had this allure because everyone was fascinated with air power, so they loved the idea. Oh, you're dropping into enemy territory from out of nowhere. It has this allure to it, but yeah, it didn't in practice didn't do too well, to be honest. Like Crete, the Battle of Crete is just like whoa, the casualties incurred by
Ma
the Germans.
Operation Market Garden,
Market
anyone?
Garden, yeah, there you go. Like,
Or
you don't want to be a
even the
paratrooper.
Japanese, in the Battle of Leyte when they
Yeah,
land, uh,
yeah,
their
definitely.
the paratroopers just get destroyed by the U.S. Eighth Army
Yeah.
forces and Sixth Army forces both. Yeah.
But let's to speed this up. Obviously, Yamashita, he rolled over Percival and Malaya. He actually adopted this ingenious strategy called, well, it's colloquially called the bicycle blitzkrieg. So he literally just got his men to bring over a lot of bicycles and steal bicycles because everyone had bicycles in the place that he was attacking Malaya. And they used bicycles so that they were, quote unquote, a fully mechanized force, I guess you could say. They were faster than walking infantry, and they stormed the British all the way to Singapore, where he bluffed Percival famously.
I just say, considering the terrain, the bicycle is probably a better choice than
Yep,
tanks and
they worked
supply
well.
trucks.
Oh yeah, and there's a famous videos and pictures of it, by the way. It's interesting to see full army on bicycles. It's fascinating, and it worked very well. He bluffed Percival at Singapore, like we were alluding to. He had like a third of the forces. He was completely out of ammunition. They told him they didn't have the artillery shells to even put a single dent into Singapore. So he's like, you know what? If this is useless, take everything we got, fire. Like we have an unlimited supply in the northeastern sector to make it seem like that's where we're attacking. And Percival took it like the idiot he was. And then Yamashita hid his little boats for his amphibious assault, went where Percival didn't think he was going to be, made it seem like he was going to win. He kept sending reports like surrender, 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 Percival, we've got you. And he bluffed him. And Percival fell for it. So it was incredible. Afterwards, he became too much of a rising star because he had taken Singapore in record time. Hideki Tojo already didn't like him. He saw him as a political rival that could maybe take over the country. So he exiled his ass to Manchuria, where Yamashita did basically nothing. It was the second time Yamashita got screwed over, by the way. He was exiled to Korea before that for what happened with the coup. And something Hideki Tojo will do to our other friend we're going to be talking about. At the last minute, put him on a suicide mission to defend the Philippines, where Yamashita did the best that he could with what he had. He definitely gave the Americans a fight for their money, but another person we're talking about decisively defeated him because this guy was a master, particularly with armored warfare. And Yamashita was he's a very controversial figure. Massacres
Uh,
happened under him, but I would argue it was at the hands of somebody else, one of his subordinates that was doing these orders. And Yamashita would be put on trial and he would be killed. But the American lawyers that were assigned to him said that they actually believed he was innocent of a lot of what he was accused of. He said he was quite the figure.
it's said, right, because a lot of those massacres, like at Alexandria Hospital in Singapore, where
Hmm.
650 patients were killed just around the fall. The colonel in charge, or colonel or major, sorry, I'm forgetting the rank. He said he got orders from General HQ,
Yeah.
but I really wouldn't put it beyond, this guy being from Tojo's faction, just acting on orders just so that they can disgrace Yamashita.
Oh yeah,
Because
maybe I should explain. The I'm going to be talking about the guy later, but the individual in question was placed as a spy by Hideki Tojo to be assigned to Yamashita
oh,
to screw him over. Specifically, that guy had orders to do so. Yeah.
not even surprised. So granted, it's questionable, like, with the way he did it, but I think given the resources, especially in the Philippines campaign,
Mm.
he probably employed the best plan that could have been utilized by
Yeah,
the Japanese.
there was not much you
And
could do.
yeah, yeah, but unfortunately, the rest of the commanders, as he said, he was taking World War II. The rest was still in World War One.
Yeah.
I think that's, and maybe I think let's switch over to the other one we consider as the best Japanese general.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, very similar to Yamashita in terms of his early career. So it's Tadamichi Kurabayashi. Whereas Yamashita was quote unquote the German expert, I guess you could say this guy was the American expert. He
Mhm.
was a brilliant, very intelligent guy. He was very capable before he even joined the military, and he ended up fighting. What was it? Actually, I won't get into that
And
yet. But beforehand, he ended up going to the United States to study, to learn, and everything. He ended up going to Harvard University, went to the University of Michigan. He studied American politics, American history. He was very, very proficient in English. And something he did that was very interesting, something Yamamoto also did, is he visited production sites. And a lot of them, like he went to Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, Texas. He got to see, the Ford plant. He bought a Chevrolet automobile that actually some fellow American soldiers helped him buy, and he drove around the country. He had a lot of fun with that. He befriended a lot of American generals too. He
yeah,
understood the capabilities of America. I think that's a crucial component to his background. Now, his achievements during World War II, he was involved in the Battle of Hong Kong, and
he
he,
was the chief of staff for General Sakai's 23rd Army.
yeah, not something to gloat over, mind you. Pretty horrible what happened there. Very Sakai. Anyway, Sakai's an asshole. But he was known to visit the wounded and enlisted men in the hospitals, which is very unusual for a Japanese commander. That's something that's definitely different about him. And then, of course, the most famous thing and the only thing people really know him for is he was commanding the forces at the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Well,
And
to be fair, I would just say, uh, I think first of all, maybe we should just reveal our name formally since we've pretty much given it away.
yeah, what do you mean?
No, the name of the general.
I said it.
Uh, okay, maybe I just got confused. I thought we've not mentioned that it's Tadamichi Kuribayashi.
Yeah, I said it at the beginning. Tadamichi
Uh,
Kurabayashi. Yeah, yeah.
okay, I just had a brain fart then.
Oh no, no worries. So, he gets he also pissed off Hideki Tojo. The reason why it's different than with Yamashita. He's seen as a defeatist because he was one of the few Japanese that advocated not to go to war with the Americans and to negotiate for a peace because he kept arguing the American production capabilities would just overwhelm the Japanese because he had firsthand seen this.
It's it was, and I think to Tojo that was the defeatist attitude, and that's why people it was said that they sent him here because they knew it's a suicide mission, and Tojo just didn't want him there.
Yeah.
And
And Hideki Tojo famously had been to the United States once, but he didn't venture. He like sat in the train because he wasn't interested in actually learning anything about the United States. The same reason he would try to kill Yamamoto, and Yamamoto was actually put out to sea to escape assassins sent by Hideki Tojo. He wanted to get rid of him because he thought Yamamoto would take over the country. Hideki Tojo thought the
but
same thing of like this guy, and he sent him on a suicide mission to Iwo Jima. Like, there's no way around it. That's exactly what he did. He wanted him to die out there.
and yeah, Kurabayashi, given the opposition that was stacked against him, it's just crazy. What was the order of the battle?
Hmm.
Right, you had almost 100,000 Marines
Yep.
and the entire fighting strength of the United States Fifth Fleet.
And what is so notable about Kurabashi is there was, I guess you would say there was a doctrine, and it loosely translates to attack him at the beach. The Japanese strategy was to just immediately storm the beachhead wherever the Americans would land on an island. I mean, full on bonsai charges, have their artillery very close to the beach areas, have their machine gun posts very up close to the beaches to literally hit them as they're coming through the water with their, amphibious vehicles. The Americans, of course, learned this strategy. They got proficient at naval bombardments. They got proficient at how to approach the beaches, how to, use their demolition teams beforehand to like get rid of the mines and everything.
Not to mention those rocket firing LCIs and
Yep.
LCTs. They would just be showering.
And when they came to Iwo Jima, there was not a peep at the beach. It was very
And that's
eerie.
because, yeah.
You
And
want to explain what
at
happened?
yeah, sorry. It's first of all when he came, right? He first of all he was also like the general who doesn't really like say go beyond his capacity. Like if his men are eating the same thing, he's eating the same.
Yeah.
And he wrote this six courageous battle vows, which was distributed. So I'll just read them out.
Mm.
And he said, "We shall defend this island with all our strength to the end. We shall fling ourselves against enemy tanks, clutching explosives to destroy them. We shall slaughter the enemy, dashing in among them to kill them. Every one of our shots shall be on target and kill the enemy. We shall not die until we have killed 10 of our enemy, and we shall continue to harass the enemy with guerrilla tactics, even if one of us remains alive." So that's his proclamation, because he knew from the get-go that he's not winning this battle.
Yeah.
It's his only hope, which to a degree I would say he was quite successful, was he has to inflict heavy losses on the United States.
So to explain to the audience, basically he was changing the doctrine. The Japanese were fighting for territory previously. In this was a war of attrition in his mind. So he wanted to inflict the maximum amount of casualties to try and somehow bring the Americans to a point where they would negotiate because he simply saw it was too much to fight for. And actually, I have a quote from James Bradley who had a lot to say about it. He said, Americans have always taken casualties very seriously. When the number of casualties is too high, public opinion will boil up and condemn an operation as a failure, even if we got the upper hand militarily. Kurabayashi had lived in America. He knew our national character. That's why he deliberately chose to fight in a way that would relentlessly drive up the number of casualties. I think he hoped the American public opinion would shift towards wanting to bring the war with Japan to a rapid end. So,
Mhm.
similar to what Yamamoto had thought, they couldn't possibly defeat America, so try
They
to
needed
make it
a
so, yeah.
they needed either a quick victory as Yamamoto Admiral Yamamoto wanted, or he had to swing the public opinion against the war effort.
And
And
yeah,
I'll just say one thing about his strategy is, as you said, there's no beach defenses.
yeah,
And it was actually such a brilliant move because there's actually a small slope on the beaches from Iwo Jima heading up to the
yeah.
exposed part of the land. Since by the island's topography, that was the only landing beach. Keep in mind, Iwo Jima is a really tiny island.
And
And
something that he understood full well was Iwo Jima was going to be the number one like location for airfields where strategic bombers could just really run rapid upon Japan from. So basically, like, yeah, the war was already over by this point, but he knew, yeah, if they take Iwo Jima, it is so bad. Like, there's no turning back. So he's like, this is a make or break at this point. Iwo Jima needs to be like a final stand kind of thing, even though it will be Okinawa later. But he tried to make a final stand on Iwo Jima.
and the way he also, and first of all, he told the artillery of the Japanese, "You guys do not fire when the American preparatory bombardments are there. Keep silent. They should not know where the hell our guns are."
Yeah,
And even when the Marines land, do not fire upon them until they've congregated and started advancing about 500 meters inland.
yeah.
So I don't know 500 meters or 500 feet, but there has to be a concentration.
And he also told the
And
men that they would not be fighting above ground. He literally told the men, this is a battle that's going to be fought purely underground. So, yeah,
and he did say also make every shot count.
yeah,
But and while he did forbade reckless charges of the banzai charges for honor and all,
mhm,
he was willing to empower his men and gave the order that when you see an opening, the enemy's disoriented, that time feel free to charge and inflict massive losses on them.
yeah,
So he's again like Yamashita thinking more pragmatically,
yeah.
and he says even if your command officer dies, you will fight, and just be focused on fighting to the death. It's like,
And he took
eh,
Japanese ingenuity to the max because when he was given the command of Iwo Jima, he made an underground city, a network. I mean, he honeycombed like 5,000 caves. He built like all these pillboxes, dug all these tunnels. It's insane the amount of work he put into this just concealed type of warfare. And I mean, the casualties speak for themselves. Iwo Jima was a
I
goddamn
think I'll
bloodbath.
just say there were 27 uh kilometers of like planned tunnels,
Yep.
and they had about 80 kilometers of such tunnels that had been completed by the time the battle took place. And if I'm not mistaken, the size of Iwo Jima is like what, 10 square kilometers?
It's tiny. Yeah, yeah, it's very small.
Sorry, it's 30 square kilometers. But and considering, and he was quite pragmatic.
Yeah.
He even put like a very small amount of his forces defending Mount Suribachi,
Mhm.
but ultimately that worked wonders because he did augment its natural defenses.
And the reason why his name is so famous is I think, as many people know, his letters were posthumously discovered, and the Americans discovered, his background, that he was quite a compassionate man. He didn't want this war to happen. He saw it as absolutely just devastating. And well, Clint Eastwood's famous film, Letters from Iwo Jima, I think is one of the better Pacific War films, and I highly recommend it. So it's very good. Ken Watanabe is
Um,
excellent
I,
in it.
I would say I would say both of Clint Eastwood's film,
Yeah,
Letters
they're
from
both
Iwo
very
Jima
good.
and Flags of Fire, they are amongst the best war movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, yeah,
But
they're excellent.
and yeah, ultimately at the end of the battle, the U.S. forces took pretty big mauling.
Hmm.
So they take almost 30,000 casualties, between all the Marines and Navy personnel killed in the kamikaze attacks. Well, granted, most of the Japanese force is KIA,
Hmm.
not to be really a shock.
Yeah.
But this is one of the very few engagements and probably the only engagement at a large scale where the US took more casualties than the Japanese.
Yeah.
I think this was the only battle at a big scale that we see this phenomenon. And it is said when Roosevelt got the first day's casualties from Iwo Jima, he actually wept.
I would imagine it was really bad.
Yeah,
But
and just one more thing as a credit to what his work was. The US did believe that it would just be 5 days to take the entire island.
yeah, that wasn't gonna happen.
5 weeks.
Yeah.
5 weeks. That is, and I think the best is, um, some people say in post-war Japan, he's put as the most outstanding commander as Admiral Yamamoto. And I think this is the best. I think, like, at least as a military person, the greatest honor you can get is when your enemies praise you.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Lieutenant General Holland Smith, the commander of the Marines, he paid him the highest tribute, saying, of all our adversaries in the Pacific, Kurabayashi was the most redoubtable.
Yep. And now we're
So,
coming to
definitely.
the worst Japanese generals. I'm hard pressed to pick between two guys. I'm gonna try and make this quicker so I can cover them both a little bit because I don't want to take too
Hmm.
much time. But I guess it goes with no surprise. One of them is the guy that we had chosen last time, for good reason. It's General Renan Mutaguchi. Um, what a character Renya is. Uh, Little known fact, he was the commander of the 1st Infantry Regiment in China, and his units were directly responsible for the Marco Polo Bridge incident. So he kind of kicked off, the Second World War in many ways. During
Very
World
nice.
during World War II, he was part of a lot of important campaigns, Malaya, Singapore. So he was with Yamashita. He was then transferred to the Philippines, and he was part of the Battle for Bataan. So he actually he got to see a lot of
Fought,
battles before he comes to Burma.
so he fought MacArthur as well then.
Yeah. So he actually got to taste some of the most brutal campaigns. So he had an exquisite amount of experience, you could say. But we come to Burma. So Mutaguchi is, of course, well known for enacting Operation Yugo, which was the invasion of India. His reasoning was that he was going to brush past the British in Assam, storm right through the gateway into the subcontinent, and that the Indians would rise up and greet the Japanese as liberators because he had, Subhas Chandra Bose with him and his INA forces. Yeah.
Sorry.
That was gonna happen.
If, if especially as an Indian, and just me laughing at this, I'm probably gonna get a lot of stick for
Okay,
this.
when the Japanese are running through Burma, let's say they treat people a little bit nicer. It's 1941, 1942. Maybe. Maybe there is a possibility because I think that you could have done this if they didn't treat the Indians so goddamn terribly. But in 1944, after all the atrocities the Japanese commit against Indians, I don't know where this guy thought. I have no idea how he thought this was going to work out like that, but he had that fantastic idea. Now,
And let's not also mention the great thing that his great idea was not even sanctioned by higher command.
so yeah, I want to talk about that. That's what's funny about Operation Yugo was basically him lying to his superiors. So what he kind of told them was he wanted to do a preemptive strike that was intentionally done to disable the 14th Army so that they could readjust and, defend their entire conquest in Burma better. He never told them it was to invade India, and he just kept lying to his superiors. And now I have to talk about this. So Operation Yugo was all pinned on the idea that he would take Impal, or maybe Kohima was the secondary target, and he didn't have the resources to do this, specifically provisions. So what he did was he just tried to figure out like how much supplies he had for the maximum amount of men he could toss. And when he realized he didn't have enough, he's like, you know what? We're going to survive off of Churchill rations. We're just going to go, we're going to win the battle, and we're going to take their food. And that's how we'll win. And so he planned
I
this
think
enormous
I think
operation.
I'll just going to just say this. The 15th Army's men, all 90,000 of them or so, were given 20 days rations and
Yep.
supplies for a 4-month battle.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. We are just gonna. It's like that Warhammer 40K, the probably like, the Warg power or Wag power of the orcs where they could build something into life. I'm pretty sure that's what he hoped would happen with supplies.
Yeah. And to
And
be,
just one more thing I'll just add. Almost every one of his divisional commanders hated the plan.
oh, all of his subordinate, all of them said he was an idiot. Like there's actual quotes where they're like, this guy is not intelligent, and they were insubordinate as hell. But when I was reading his plan, he actually had like terminology where he would say, the entire plan rests on Chachiro Kuyo, Churchill rations. So we must be very quick when we go, and we must prioritize the capture of British supply dumps by using Totsubin, swift onslaught. That's the translation. And basically, I don't know if he even told the subordinates. He's like, if we do not seize the British supply dumps, we're dead. Because they would die of starvation. They didn't have the fuel for the trucks. They didn't have anything to do this. So we're looking at like kind of like Rommel in the North Africa campaign, but like a lot more crazy. The Operation Yugo is enormous, and the fact that he had somehow tricked his superiors into allowing him to do this, and them probably only learning when it was happening, what he was intending to do, and it's an absolutely glorious disaster. It's
I think
fantastic.
I'll just say something about what his three so because the three main infantry divisions, right?
Yeah,
What each of their commanders thought. So General Sato of the 31st Division distrusted his motives.
yeah,
I feel so bad for Sato, like because he did care for his men,
yeah.
the way he took a career fall.
Oh yeah.
General Yanagida of the 33rd Division,
He's the
he
one that's
openly denied
insubordinate.
his
Yeah,
superior called him a blockhead.
yeah,
And General Yamauchi of the 50th Division was like, already, yeah, I'm anyways sick and I'm gonna die. I just don't care.
yeah. And open insubordination, by the way. It's good on them because it was so stupid. So,
Yeah, I
Evan,
think I'll just add
yeah.
one thing, maybe just for General Sato here, just for since we won't touch upon him, is he Mutaguchi just kept telling this guy to attack, and he's like, until you give me supplies after like 3 months, almost 3 months into the battle, I am not going to attack.
Yeah.
And he just finally just said, like this was our first 25th May, right? So Ichigo's gone on for almost 3 months. Sorry, Yugo, my bad.
It's part of Ichigo though.
It's gone
They're the
three.
dual missions,
True
yeah.
enough. Yeah, Yugo in specific has gone on for 3 months, and he's like, I need supplies or I'm not gonna attack. And Mutiguchi openly tells him you have to attack. And General Sato is like, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to sacrifice my men more than I need to.
Yeah.
And on 31st May, he openly cuts communication and withdraws his men,
Yeah.
completely, withdrawing the army, at least his division, which is unheard of. And
Oh yeah.
he did not, and he wanted to get Mutaguchi down. That
And
he would request a court martial, but Mutaguchi, just to save face, right? That the commanding officers always right. They declared Sato mentally ill,
yeah,
and he was kind of blamed for all of this, Sato, for the failures. But I'm like,
of
yeah,
course.
it's really Mutaguchi.
And just to give the scope of like how absolutely terrible this was, of like the nearly 100,000 men, 55,000 are gonna basically die because of starvation. It's insane. They're gonna die of starvation. Like 12,000 of these
Only
soldiers survived, and actually they
that,
suffered like an 80% casualty rate. It's insane. Yeah.
and keep in mind, this is like the best forces available to the Japanese in Burma.
Yeah.
I mean, they have other reserves, but they are already now being engaged by Stillwell and the Chinese forces, and the cream of the core has now been completely destroyed.
Oh yeah.
This guy just deserves it to be the worst. But I don't know. So I've never read too much about your second character, second choice that you put. So maybe you could talk about him.
Yes. One sec. Just wanted to make sure in my notes. Yeah, so the second character we've alluded to actually a few times. It's Masanobu Tsuji. People might not know his name because he was never a highly ranked individual, but he had a profound impact on the war. He's the individual that I was alluding to that was sent by Hideki Tojo as a spy under Yamashita.
Oh,
He
okay.
I put him as an honorable mention, but I almost want to pick him as the worst because in my opinion, he is evil. Just plain and simple, he is an evil person. Um, he gained a reputation for being a strategic thinker. He was basically a think tank. He's like a think tank kind of guy in the army. He was very well respected for being a war planner, and that's why he was kept around for so long. But I'll just go over a little bit of his career. He was a senior staff officer, of course, in the army. He was under Yamashita for the Malayan campaign and during the Battle of Bataan, where Yamashita tried to get rid of him. He literally would try to get people to drive this guy in a car away from his command because he knew he was a spy and he knew he was there to screw with him. And
Can I just add one thing,
yeah,
if you don't mind? He was the staff officer in the Kwantang army, and his attitude kind of led to the Japanese defeat at Khalkhin Gol as well.
oh yeah, I'm gonna get to that. He's part of one of the all of the terrible things in the war. But he really emphasized unconventional warfare, and he liked very bold, high-risk strategies to achieve quick victories. So he was the kind of guy that would actually call upon a bonsai charge to just try and decisively win a battle. He had a profound role in numerous campaigns, and they're all horrible. But as you alluded to, from 1938 to 1939, he was a staff officer in the Kwangtung Army, and he instigated. It was him who started the Nomohan incident that led to the Battle of Kwak Gol. So it is actually his fault that that happened, and that is a
Yeah,
pivotal moment in history. Yeah,
yeah, no, where the Japanese really got their that is a disaster.
yeah.
I mean, I want
Now,
to call it an ass whooping.
yeah. Now he's the equivalent of one of these kind of the cultists in the Nazi regime, the guys who are like they really believe in ultra nationalism. He was an ultra nationalist. And something that he did, which was very disgusting, is he would, I mean, I guess you'd say it's illegal. He would issue orders under the name of his superiors without telling them. So during the Malayan campaign, he would issue orders to the men to perform horrible massacres. That if you've listened to my Pacific War Week by Week podcast, there was numerous ones that happened in Malaya. They're all issued by Tsuichi. We have official notes to indicate so, and he did so in the name of Yamashita. And Yamashita would be hung because of this. even though he probably didn't know about
Ouch.
it. Yeah. So he also at Singapore, he was the one directly responsible for the Suok Ching massacre. It's a very famous one, and he would always do this under the name of his superiors. For the Bataan Death March, he was the key planner that tried to make sure that things would go terribly and there would be inhumane treatment, and he made it more brutal than it had to be. Honestly, he was the
Uh,
mastermind.
and not to mention, it seems it's alleged that if Japanese Prime Minister Kone wanted peace,
Mm.
that he had already kept a plan to assassinate him.
Yeah. Yeah, government by assassination he was one of the guys that was really responsible for that. Funny enough, he ends up like evading all of this, after the war. I don't know how he managed to get away with all the war crimes, but he went to Laos in like the 60s and he just disappeared. So he was probably murdered. Yeah, I would have I would imagine someone figured out where he was going. They assassinated his ass. He
Yeah, I'll just also add for our listeners, especially our old-time listeners, he was involved in the Coconut Trail campaign and Guadalcanal.
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's just evil. Like there's no way around it. There's guys who did things that were terrible and war is terrible and it causes good men to do bad things as the quote is, but this guy intentionally did this stuff. He just
yeah,
wanted to. Yeah.
I'm with your opinion on this.
Yeah, it's just
Like,
evil.
holy crap. Yeah,
So yeah,
I
if anyone ever wants
guess.
to read, there is a book on this guy, and it's because this guy, he was very, what do you call it? He loved to write his in his diary, so he wrote everything that he did. So we have direct like information on why and how he did stuff. It's awful.
So it's
Yeah,
like, is it saying, okay, today I decide to banzai charge the US forces at Guadalcanal,
yeah.
but all these idiots, they did not have the same warrior spirit, so that's why we died. It's not my fault. Is this an extract?
Yeah, and yeah, it's funny how he ends up in all these key places, and he makes it worse for his own people, by the way, because he does all of these inhumane things to the enemy. And what do you think is going to happen when the enemy gets a hold of your guys? Like, yeah, he's a bastard. And I guess we're now
But
coming up to the Americans.
yeah, there are only one left. So perhaps maybe you could just start with honorable mention since last time he took center stage in this episode for the US Pacific forces, Vinegar Joe.
Oh, you want to do Vinegar Joe? So we'll start with the
No,
worst.
just a honorable mention. So we're not going to spend too much time with him
Okay,
today.
honorable mention for the worst. Uh, well, I still think he is the worst.
Fair enough. If
I mean,
you want, you
okay,
can
we
just give
were
it.
this one's a bit long. There's like three guys I would we're gonna there's a trifecta of worst, but for Vinegar Joe, I mean, it goes without saying. I think I think he was a bad commander because he could not withhold his own personal begrudgments, and he could not get along with anybody he worked for. He did not like for somebody who is an expert on Asia, quote unquote. He seemed to just not like the Chinese. Like he really seemed to get on their nerves all the time. He could not work with Chiang Kai-shek. It literally saw his resignation because of that.
I'm not, well, to be fair, from what I've read about Vinegar Joe, I'm not sure he could work with anybody because
Yeah.
I think even within the Americas, there's probably a good chunk of the population he just doesn't like.
He didn't get along with even his
Chenault.
colleagues like Chenault. Chenault was honestly a guy who was well respected. And the reason why he didn't get along with Chenault is because Vinegar Joe did not believe in air power. He really disregarded strategic bombing. He thought it was a waste of resources that could be allocated to land forces and basically World War One-esque tactics. He strongly had this, I don't know what it was about him. He did not believe in the
That,
capabilities of aerial warfare.
and I think I'll also add this about Vinegar Joe in the Burma campaign. He really thought, the Marauders brigades and the Chindits, right? Like these deep,
Yeah.
long-range groups are supposed to be entrenching troops when I guess you could call them more akin to, say, a stormtrooper infiltration unit because they're
Yeah.
supposed to bypass the hard points and attack the reinforcements
Yeah, he got them
from
killed.
ambush
Yeah.
positions. I think the long range desert group is probably the best
Yeah.
World War II equivalent I can quickly think of. And I think I remember there was this during the time of the 1944 offensives, one of the British brigades of Chindits, Wingate's gone.
Yeah.
And this major is repeatedly told to, attack a strong point, right? Like he's, first of all, it's not even a brigade. He's no longer having a brigade. He's pretty much down to a regiment now. If you take effective combat state strength, he doesn't naturally, as they are long range penetration units,
No
you don't have
artillery,
heavy weapons,
no heavy
no heavy,
equipment, no ability to take
nothing.
a fortified position, and yeah, Stillwell was an idiot for that.
Garrisoned, garrisoned by a division.
Yep. Yeah,
And
Stillwell had no idea what was going on with guerrilla warfare. He didn't understand the purpose of the Chindits, what they were doing, Merle's Marauders. He got so many of them killed doing that. Yeah.
and just for his honestly like stupid ideas, I would call it, because he, whether he knew it or not, he just did not know how to use his forces properly.
Yeah.
And as I said, I think China, I don't know, like, see, obviously it does come into the gray line between Chiang Kai-shek's regime and the US interests in World War II. They had the continuous clash of power of the retraining and supplies of the Chinese armies of Chiang Kai-shek. So
Hmm.
it's all the new men were supposed to be under Stillwell at Stillwell's insistence, whereas Chiang Kai-shek naturally would not allow that.
And I can
So I
expand
think he
upon. Oh, yeah,
just
go.
made the situation horribly worse, would you say? But defer to you.
But everyone kind of knows that he and Chiang Kai-shek did not get along, notably because Stillwell wanted all the men under his command, and he wanted Chiang Kai-shek to basically not be the leader of his country in a lot of ways. It did make sense. He made inroads, and this was definitely this is true. He flirted with Mao Zedong, and he wanted to work with the communists. And of course, Chiang Kai-shek did not like this. Stillwell would actually write later on after the war that he really feels he missed out the chance to fight with the Chinese communists. So I don't know how that works out, but that was an egregious error on his part because if you want to piss off Chiang Kai-shek even more, yeah, let's try and flirt with the communists. So he,
Pretty sure that also definitely would have not gone down well with quite a few US commanders at the time, to say the least.
yep. And for a guy that was so obsessed with logistics, because he was a logistics kind of guy, he was a little too over obsessed with the Lido Road, and it actually would hurt things. Like he wouldn't allocate resources to other things that were working at the time, like let's say traveling over the hump and such. So he made a lot of like minor blunders and errors. What he did in Burma, I mean, he came into Burma with kind of a fresh unit. When the fight like they did work, with Sun Lee-jin and him, but they didn't have to go through the tough times. He came in when times were kind of good, I would say. So even even like the things that he managed to accomplish, I'd grade him on a scale. But yeah, I would have to say if you're looking for bad generals on the American side, he's definitely up there. Do you want me to go through the worst still, or do you want me to?
I'll just add one thing about his failed leader road plan before we move on to our other
Mhm,
generals.
sure.
July 1945, the last full month of the war, only 6,000 tons of supplies were ferried across on the Lido Road,
Yeah.
and 71,000 tons were actually effectively delivered by over the hump via air,
Yeah, because the
which,
leader, yeah, exactly.
which, not to mention the Lido Road did not even get into full completion till like start of 1945.
Yeah, and he was so obsessed with building it. And can you imagine the amount of resources? Like it makes sense, but if you're not able to do it quickly enough, it was redundant. Anyways, Joseph
Yeah.
Stilwell, man, maybe he was the worst. I'm only adding this because a lot of comments on my YouTube channel came up. I do not think this guy is the worst or bad as a general. I think he made a mistake and it is very remembered, so a lot of people always bring him up. But I mean, anybody who's watched my channel knows I know the granddaughter of General William Rupertus. He made a blunder at the Battle of Peleliu, and people have not forgotten that. I think Rupertus had one of the most incredible careers because it was extremely long. He got a taste of Asia before anybody really did. Like he was in China as a Marine before a lot of guys. He actually understood the enemy before, World War II happened. He knew the capabilities of the Japanese because he got to see it firsthand. So he brought a lot of experience into it. He trained the generation of U.S. Marines. Rifleman's Creed is what he created. He made the Marines what the Marines are. Why
And
would some people put him on this list?
and
Uh,
not to mention, let's just add that he did a pretty good job with Vandergrift at the start of the Guadalcanal campaign when
mhm.
the Marines were running the show.
Yeah. Now we come to the thing that people always bring up. So at Peleliu, which by the way, controversial battle, and I don't think that this falls on his shoulders. I think there's a lot of blame to be placed on a lot of commanders for Peleliu. But what he's renowned for is he underestimated the Japanese. He didn't think the Japanese would adopt a new defensive doctrine because he was ready for like at the beach defense kind of thing, whereas the Japanese were now beginning to try and maximize the max amount of casualties they can. And well, he decided to not adopt new tactics. He had this really bad tendency to not want the army to get involved, so he wanted to just kind of grab the glory for the Marines, and the Marines would incur incredible casualties because of this. Needless too. It definitely was a mistake. He only dispatched a certain amount of his divisions. He should have put more in. He should have accepted help from the army. They ended up facing a well dug in Japanese force. They took like terrible casualties. Also, he had multiple chances to kind of remedy the situation, and he didn't. And basically, more men died than they should have. That was his egregious error. And because he actually dies shortly after this, or is it at the end of this campaign, it's kind of the last thing that people remember him by. So it kind of completely just tarnished his whole career. And I don't think it's right to say that he was a terrible commander because this was not just his decisions. Actually, most of the commanders had misjudged the Japanese on Peleliu. Peleliu should not have been a campaign. They should have bypassed it. It was very controversial to begin with. I think whoever was in command would have saw heavy casualties, but he definitely didn't make things any better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of sad they could not have bypassed, given that you did end up bypassing, like, say, a major stronghold like Rapal.
Yeah.
So,
And
I
I
think
guess,
maybe,
do you want me
yeah,
to name the other one? Because I didn't even write notes for the other guy. The other guy, everyone knows who
you,
I was going to bring up. Okay.
go crazy,
So
man.
obviously you got MacArthur, right? So I don't think MacArthur, I do not think he's the worst general of the Pacific War. Not even
It's
close.
we Well, I think that's why we put him in the category of not put him at the worst. He is overrated to us.
Yeah. I think what would bother him the most would be to be put in the mid of the pack. Because, if his name's not there, if he bad news is good news, he would want to be front and center stage because this guy was a prima donna. He everyone knows I've said it 100 times already. He completely blundered the defense of the Philippines. That definitely was an enormous mistake. He had multiple reasons to do so that had to do with personal attachments to the president of the Philippines, the Filipino people, and I think financial reasons. He made some money during this. It really does look like there was some stuff going on there. He he goes through all of this stuff to change the doctrine, which was War Plan Orange, to have like a more offensive nature, a more fight them at the beach kind of situation, which was stupid. He didn't have the forces to do it. He completely adopted the wrong stance. He should have completely gone with the predetermined plan. When he finally did so, it was far too late. Led to him losing an unbelievable amount of territory, incurring a lot of casualties, and all of the resources that should have been placed in Bataan weren't placed there. So his men basically didn't have what they needed to fight it out longer. What else is there to say about him? Other than, because I always go on about the Philippines, the only other time we see him kind of make a blunder, because for the rest of his career, he doesn't do too bad. He does an admirable job. But during the Bunagona campaign, he literally rushed it because he thought that Nimitz and the other commanders would seize the initiative from him because he wanted to direct the war effort back to the Philippines. So he rushed a campaign and he caused unbelievable amounts of casualties upon the American Australian forces, and it was needless. I really think that is disgusting. I really think that is one of the worst parts
It's
of his
just
career.
like, again, just add on to this is he is not the worst general, because if he was really, like, say, a horrible general in terms of command, you're not going to last in a job, especially like in
Yeah.
the allied forces where guys get sacked quite easily for really bad performances.
Like I was
We've
saying,
seen that.
yeah.
No, even if you look at, say, the US with John Lucas or Fred and all in
Mm,
the European theater of operations, they were sacked quite effectively.
yeah.
So MacArthur does have the traits. He did plan well. He did show some amount of coordination. I think for a long time, Blamey and Kruger, George Kearney, and Halsey, right? So it is showing that he could get a combined arms warfare to work quite well, right? Halsey with the Pacific Command of the South, sorry, that is the South Pacific area. Blamey with the Australians, and granted, I think the only thing that is also annoying is obviously him wanting the glory and also the guys who will just, you know, worship him for lack of a better term. But he did a good job. Granted, no doubt, with the resources available, it was made all the more easier.
I mean,
And that's not necessarily his fault. It's not
yeah.
at all his fault because any general could have, but it's, I guess, that's where you put the thing of when does a person become a brilliant general versus not.
Because you always have to look at it this way. He had terrible faults, terrible errors. He did a lot of bad shit. But in the end, he seized the goddamn initiative. He kind of defeated Nimitz. I mean, he's the guy that is going to be stepping foot in Japan and start. I mean, like people joke, he became the emperor of Japan for a few years. So he managed to get everything he wanted, and that says enough. He was a prima donna. Um, he was America's Caesar, but I don't think he's the worst. I mean, and he had an
Yeah,
extensive career before World
I
War
think,
II.
yeah, I think that's why it's probably the best in my view. I think he's in the overrated category
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's
for
overrated as
us.
hell.
Yeah, he's not a brilliant or great general, but more than competent to say the least.
Because he is underrated because he had to depend on who we're choosing for the best U.S. general, which I think will be surprising to people. It's I chose Walter Kruger, and
Hmm.
to sum it up, Walter Kruger was a great general because he dealt with MacArthur, pretty much. Yeah. But Walter Kruger is an extremely interesting guy. He's extremely intelligent, and he had an extensive military career. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Spanish-American War, World War One, and even the interwar period. He had attended a lot of different military schools and advanced things. He was known to be a meticulous planner. He was a proponent and an expert in combined arms operations, something that he would slap Yamashita for. Yamashita finally ran into a guy who knew that game better than him and who had more resources, mind you. But yeah, Kruger, he definitely defeated Yamashita decisively. But
I
like,
think I'll just add some early things about Kruger before officially the war broke out, if you don't mind.
yeah, sure.
So Kruger was very good at planning, if you ask me.
Mm,
It's probably one of the best that the US ever did have.
yeah.
And I think the best is the Louisiana maneuvers, where he was given command of the Third Army.
Hmm.
And he did a really good job because when this in the training exercise, when the second he was attacking with the Third Army against the Second Army, and they conducted a fighting withdrawal, he sent Patton's division in a long outflanking maneuver to cut out the enemy retreat. I
Yeah.
mean, in this war games. So this is to your point where he's understanding the use of modern warfare. And again, he was able to, move quite quickly. He was able to reorient his forces properly to react to threats rather than try to keep a static line. So this is showing his capabilities. And I think one of the interesting things is he also noted one very good planning general, Eisenhower.
Yeah.
He did when he got command of the Third Army, Eisenhower was his chief of staff. And
Yeah.
he had specifically asked for him. And yeah, then I think it is to his disappointment that when war broke out, he did not really get a frontline posting. So it is
Sure.
actually a big surprise where Douglas MacArthur asked for him specifically to be
Specifically,
the
yeah.
exactly to
Which,
command his army forces. And he's like, due to my long and intimate association with him. And Kruger's like, okay, hold up, this is strange
Yeah,
because
they
he did
barely
say
work
that
together. Yeah.
no, they
They
knew
work
each other for
together, but they
40
didn't know
years.
each other very well. But anyways, yeah,
He
for
said, yeah,
Kruger
they
it
were
was
not
weird.
close.
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, but yeah, he did. But unfortunately, I think MacArthur was also hoping they would transfer the Third Army to the Pacific.
Yeah.
The War Plans Division, like, nope, you just get the skeleton Sixth Army.
Well, MacArthur didn't want to worry about logistics. He wanted a guy who knew his shit. So he wanted a subordinate that would take care of a lot of the heavy lifting for him. And Kruger had to deal, like, to say, like, I'm making a joke. He had to deal with MacArthur. But you have to understand, MacArthur would change his mind off of a whim. And I mean, it would be dramatic. Like, they'd have, like, an invasion plan for some place. And they'd be like, you know what? No, we're actually going to invade here. And it's like, okay, Kruger, figure out how we're going to get all that logistics, for this. And at the very beginning, Kruger, he was given the Alamo Force, and it wasn't even a full army. They didn't even have a real HQ. And he's like, "Oh, what do you expect it to do? You're going to engage land, sea, and air." This guy had to deal with doing amphibious assaults, and he's a general in the army. He doesn't have a navy. He barely has any vessels with MacArthur's little navy there, and yet he still managed to pull off just numerous assaults by sea, numerous campaigns. It's simply incredible. And he had to juggle everything basically, logistics, everything. It's very impressive at the early days. And as a commander,
Uh,
yeah.
he works very well because if you see, ultimately, he works with the South Pacific area as well,
Hmm.
with Halsey's forces as they move up through New Guinea and start the island hopping campaigns. So, you have the New Guinea operations and the continuation on that line by Kruger's armed forces and MacArthur's.
Yeah.
And then you also have the Navy kind of taking like the Navy of Halsey's, taking a lead, but still under MacArthur,
Yeah.
going through the New Britain, New Georgia area. And the way they just plan all these captures of these various islands for the air bases, which, that's where like both MacArthur and Kruger were quite adamant that this is the key that is going to help us gain victory is air power. Kruger
Yeah.
was able to work very well with the like, Thomas Kincaid, Halsey, and even George General Gurney, the commander of the air forces.
Hmm.
And the results, I think, is they just speak for itself.
And something that he was actually a kind of, I'm not gonna say he's a pioneer on, but something he did very effectively in the Pacific is he didn't engage the enemy simply to, seize the defensive position the enemy held or to try and just destroy the enemy. Most of the time, he was performing amphibious assaults to get behind the enemy, to cut off their supply line, to cut, what do you say, cut the grapes from the vine, to let them wither away. He did this multiple times. It was very impressive. So it saved a lot of American lives, because the amount of campaigns he had to do. There was also
Yeah,
another as yeah.
especially uh, just to add to it, he when you can bypass a defense after
Mhm.
neutralizing it, it's actually a better idea than just
Damn right, yeah,
taking the same shattered defense line.
of course. He has one thing that's kind of notable about him. A lot of the commanders relied on ultra intelligence to make decisions, and he didn't. Not that he didn't trust ultra intelligence, he did not want to rely on it, and he always made sure to do his own intelligence, his own reconnaissance, despite whatever the intelligence would indicate. And this would pay off on some occasions. When he didn't know about the enemy, he was a very aggressive commander. So there was one circumstance, it was during the Biak campaign. They knew the Japanese were massing to assault their beachhead when they had invaded, and they didn't know the number of the Japanese. And he decisively said, "No, we're counterattack immediately." This was something he actually did a lot, and he was lucky. The force was much larger than they could have ever expected, but because he was so quick and decisive, they managed to defeat the superior force. So that's something that I particularly like in a commander is just the fact that you're very decisive and quick. You're going to make your choices like, let's go with it and do it, even if it's a bad choice.
That's something that's something like where Rommel excelled at it. That
Yeah.
actually served him very well. And it can serve a commander very well. And in fairness, that sometimes even MacArthur also showed that kind of decisiveness of
Mm,
what is needed,
yeah. And
Vandegrift, etc. So yeah,
and I have to give him points because, for the Battle of Luzon, he spanked Yamashita. he basically what Yamashita ended up doing, which is really bad on Yamashita, by the way. Yamashita did have armor because he advocated for it. He demanded he would have it, but he was forced to defend multiple different positions, and he ended up spreading his armor out in what you would call mobile piecemeal formations. So he would hope to find where the enemy would attack, and then concentrate his armor to try and meet them. Whereas Kruger just realized immediately, looking at where the Japanese positions were, he's just like, no, concentrates all of his armor and he just used it as a hammer to go after each one by one by one. And he completely destroyed Yamashita doing this. So,
So just concentration versus piecemeal.
yeah, combined arms warfare during World War II, like we see with Heinz Guderian or something, if you're gonna hit them hard in a location with everything all at once, lightning, go. And then don't stop. Keep
Yeah.
moving. Don't let the enemy have the initiative anymore. That's what he did.
I think just one thing interesting about your fact that you mentioned General Kruger
Mm.
also did his own assessments. So when they began the Luzon campaign, ultra intelligence, uh, kind of led that, MacArthur's intelligence officer to believe that there were about 170,000 Japanese soldiers on the island. And Kruger actually said, through his staff that it's about 234,000.
Yeah.
The real number was actually 200 and almost 290,000.
Yep. Yeah. No one. And they had no idea what Yamashita had. Yeah. It's pretty bad.
But at least it's better to go on the Kruger's estimate
Yeah.
than MacArthur's because that was closer. But both were quite off, to say the
So
least.
when it comes to the Pacific, I have to say, because obviously, last time I had chosen like Vandergrift. I like Vandergrift, but
I'll just one more thing before we just
yeah.
switch. Uh, an interesting thing about like Kruger, he was uh, you know, technically kind of never really promoted at flag rank properly
Mm,
as like the general stars. So he had like technically an acting rank.
yeah.
And on 5th March 1945, at the insistence of MacArthur, he was promoted to a full 4-star general.
Mm,
And
yeah.
according to MacArthur, even though they clashed a lot with the drive on Manila, he
Yes, they
said
did.
he rated his generalship far better than Patton or Omar Bradley.
Of course, because he was under him. Of course,
True
MacArthur would
enough,
say that.
true
But
enough.
yeah.
But
But
at
it
least
is
that,
interesting for MacArthur to say anything about another human being. That is interesting. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, MacArthur did make some strange decisions that way, right? For example, the appointment of General Savage as command of the Australian forces and not,
Yeah.
who's that other general? Vassy,
Yeah.
General Vassy.
But you know what? Stating all of that, we went almost way too long on this, and that covers
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
I think this is a lot of fun. I just want to say to the audience, I hope you enjoy this and you want to hear more stuff like this because we're planning 3 more episodes like this. It's more of an open forum discussion. I like it more. It's more fun. Before I let you off the hook, everybody, do remember if you want to further support the channel, please check out the YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where you will find the exclusive podcast. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. But yeah, Gaurav, this has been a lot of fun, and I guess next time we're going to be hitting up Europe.
That is correct. European army generals.
Oh, and we're going to talk about the old rivalry
Oh,
between
I'm.
Patton and Montgomery.
Oh, yes, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Until next time.